Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name's Sophie and today I thought I would talk about different types of disability. So I'll be talking about FMLA or Family Medical Leave Act, short-term disability, long-term disability, and SSDI or Social Security Disability Income. So these are for people who are living in the United States, and I can't obviously say if you would qualify for any of these or if you do qualify, if your experience would be similar to mine. So this is my experience only, that's all I can speak to. So let's get started with FMLA. So FMLA is a federal program that most employers have to abide by, and what it offers is 12 weeks of unpaid leave. You do have to qualify, which is normally your employer has to be a certain size. You had to have worked there for at least a year, and you have to work for, I think, 1,250 hours within the past year. I'm not sure exactly on those numbers, but I think that's what it is. I looked it up a couple days ago. So that's FMLA and is unpaid. Short-term disability and long-term disability are normally offered through employers, or you can buy them on your own and you can supplement them from your employer. My employer did offer them. I did not supplement. I did not put any of my income toward supplementing. So when I went out of work, short-term and long-term disability both pay 60% of my base salary. So as I've said in previous videos, I worked in the medical field and I worked night shift. So on top of my base salary, I also got a night shift differential. So a few extra dollars per hour because I worked night shift. Then short-term and long-term disability does not include that differential because it is only your base salary. Ask anyone who works night shift when they go on vacation and their pay is drastically different. You may think a few dollars an hour doesn't really add up that much, but it really does in the long term. Excuse me while I look at my notes. That's why this annoying glare is here. I'm looking at the screen. So when I went out on FMLA, how my company does it is normally when you are on FMLA, they also start using your short-term disability, which for my company was 6 months. I don't know if that's the same across the board or not. That's how it is where I worked. So FMLA, again, 12 weeks, short-term disability, 6 months. So obviously I ran out of FMLA first, and FMLA is what holds your job. So they can't fire you, or they're not supposed to fire you when you are out on FMLA. It is supposed to guarantee your job. Now, not necessarily the exact position you were in, but an equal position within the company. Short-term disability, once you are not on FMLA, does not guarantee your job. So my company, like I said, when you're on FMLA, you are normally on short-term disability as well, and that is because you get paid. You get 60% of your income. You can say, like, no, I don't want to use my short-term disability, don't pay me. If you're on FMLA, you can do that. I don't know people who do that. I live alone. I don't know. I obviously couldn't just not get paid for 12 weeks. That would not work. But maybe if there's a 2-income family or, I don't know, different situations, that would be an option. That was not an option for me, so I took them both at the same time. How short-term disability and FMLA worked is I didn't really have to do much work. There was a form that I gave to my doctor that basically said, what is the symptoms, what are the diagnoses, what tests are you doing, when do you expect she'll be able to return from work, is she going for any surgery, stuff like that. And that was it. So short-term disability was 6 months, so they kept saying like, oh, I think she'll be able to go back to work X date. And then we get close to X date and I'd be like, hey, am I getting cleared for work? If not, we need to redo these forms. And it was the same form the whole 6 months. It was what diagnoses, what test, blah, blah. And so I didn't really have to do anything except be the go-between between the doctor and the short-term disability company, because my company that I worked for outsourced it, so my company was not making the decision. It was a third party. And that didn't always go smoothly. My doctor would fax a form. I would call the company to make sure they got it. They didn't get it. Then I'd have to go get a copy of the form or have my doctor fax it. And what I eventually ended up doing was my doctor would fax it. I would go pick up a copy so that if the disability company didn't get it, I could just fax it myself. And I did end up buying an all-in-one printer, scanner, faxer, simply because of all this paperwork back and forth. And faxing is very expensive if I go to Staples or something like that to fax. So it was much cheaper to just buy an all-in-one. I got it on sale from Amazon for like $50. Yes, and so during this time, I did attempt to go back to work. Well, I did go back to work once for 2 months. So at that time, when I went back to work, the doctor had to write if I had any restrictions and whatnot. And basically my position, I could not go back to work with any restrictions. There was once, I think my doctor had written something about restrictions, but then also said I had no restrictions, and I had to go back to my doctor and be like, hey, this has to match. Fix it. And she was like, well, I don't want you to do this. I'm like, then I can't go back to work. Like, you either need to say I have no restrictions or I can't go back to work. Again, if you've watched my earlier videos about how this whole thing went down, I did not want to go back to work. I did not think I was ready to go back to work. My coworkers did not think I was ready to go back to work, but I went back to work and lasted 2 months before getting sick again. Anyway, that is how short-term disability worked from my old employer. Long-term disability is a whole other can of worms. So what happens was when short-term disability was getting ready to end, I got notified that it was getting ready to end and that my case was going to be reviewed for long-term disability. With long-term disability, again, this was just with my employer and the company, the third party who does it. I don't know if it is the same everywhere, but when your case first gets looked at, they look at you if you are disabled from your own occupation. And I'm putting it in quotes because it is a legal term with a definition specifically for this. So own occupation is exactly what it sounds like. It's your occupation. And whether or not you can do the duties required of your own occupation. And then any occupation is any occupation that your education and training would allow you to do. That comes in later, and I will get to that. The other concepts you should be aware of is the difference between totally disabled and partially disabled. Again, in quotes, because they're legal definitions, again, pertinent to this particular policy. So totally disabled means you cannot perform any of the primary duties of that occupation. Hard stop. Partially disabled, and I always screw up saying this, so bear with me. Partially disabled means you can do all of the requirements of the job some of the time. So all of the requirements some of the time, or some of the requirements all of the time. But, and here's what makes no sense to me, if you are partially disabled, for the purposes of this policy, you are considered totally disabled. Why they separate them, then, I don't know. It's a little confusing, to me at least. I haven't read through the whole policy lately. I've just gone and looked up definitions and stuff like that when I was getting ready to make this video. So those are what you need to be aware of. I did actually have to ask the person in charge of my case for a copy of my disability policy because I couldn't get it. By the time I was going on long-term disability, I no longer had access to like the system where I could have downloaded the policy. And even when I worked there, I could never find the policy. Long story short, make sure you have a copy of your policy. It's important. It's going to give you a lot of information. Mine gave me all these definitions, so I knew what they were talking about. Sorry, I feel like I'm being choked at the moment. Let me move this. So, those are the definitions. So for your first 2 years on long-term disability from this policy, this company, they look at whether you are totally or partially disabled from your own occupation. After those 2 years, which I will be going into when it gets to May of 2023, I will have been on long-term disability for 2+ years. They look at whether you are now disabled from any occupation. So that is where those two terms come into play. What goes into long-term disability? This is where I've had to do most of the work. So long-term disability, you sign a release form so they can get all of your medical records. It's easier than me having to provide medical records. What normally happens is my case person will call me every few months and he'll like, hey, are you seeing all these doctors still? I'll say yes or no. He'll ask me when the last time I saw them was, when the next time I'm seeing them is. And then he will get the notes. Sorry, there's a gnat. I've been trying to kill it for days. I haven't been able to catch it or kill it, so yeah. So they get medical records. I have tons of paperwork to fill out. Well, not tons. So at the very beginning, I filled out paperwork regarding my work and education history. So are you familiar with computers? Do you know how to use a spreadsheet, a word processor? Do you have an email? Do you have a website? Do you use social media? Like all of those type of questions to see what your work and training history is and what skills and talents you have. This time around, so since we're going into the any occupation, now they're asking for ADLs and IADLs. So ADLs are activities of daily living. Do you need help grooming? Do you need help getting dressed? Do you need help with those sorts of things? IADLs, instrumental activities of daily living, balancing a checkbook, cleaning the house, driving, shopping, those type of things. So I am in the process of filling all that out, and it's a lot more than the work education. That was a bunch of checkboxes. Do you have experience with this? How much? Explain. And a lot of it I didn't have experience with, so it was really quick. This is a lot more explaining that I need to do, because I really want to provide them an overall picture of what my day-to-day life is like. I don't just want to answer their question at face value. You are allowed to write, or in my case, I am typing because my arms get fatigued too quickly if I write, and my handwriting goes downhill really quickly. It's just not pretty. So I'm trying to type as much as possible, but even with that, I can only do a little bit at a time. So I'm working on that. But I'm really trying to explain my situation, what my symptoms are, how they affect my day-to-day functioning, and the like. So that's sort of the sum of long-term disability. Again, most of it has been on their end getting doctor's notes. And I do make sure, like when I see my primary doctor, since she is the one looking at the big picture, I had just went to see her, I think it was last month in May, and I was like, hey, long-term disability will probably be contacting me soon. I need you to write down like where all of my symptoms are currently and like how they affect my day-to-day functioning. And literally the next day I got a call from long-term disability saying, hey, this is what we need now. So that was really good timing. But I am allowed to type my own information, so I will be sending them something as well, again, just so they have a full picture and aren't just going on the doctor's notes who see you once or twice for 15 or 20 minutes and they don't get all of the information because there just isn't enough time. I think that's all there. So definitely, again, make sure you have copies of your policies for short and long-term disability. Eventually, when and if I am able to work in some capacity, I will make another video explaining how that works with long-term disability, whether that affects it, whether it doesn't affect it, how it affects it, and stuff like that. I do have some of that information via the policy I could talk about, but until I experience it, I don't want to make a video in case I'm interpreting all of the legalness wrong. So maybe stay tuned for that, depending on if I'm able to find a job and be able to work. Lastly, Social Security disability. Oh my. So, I do have a lawyer. I did not even attempt to apply on my own. So what happened was he filled out all the paperwork. A lot of it had to be done over the phone. He needed doctors' addresses, appointment dates, hospitalization, hospital addresses, phone numbers, diagnoses, all of that stuff, medical record, form releases, and then every month I send him when my doctor appointments were, I send him visit notes, and then he is able to get anything and everything else he needs from my signature release forms. I can't think of what they're called. It's evening. My brain is not as good functioning in the evening as it is in the morning, and it's not all that great in the morning either, but it's definitely worse in the evening. But anyway, the release that you sign that says someone can get your medical records, those. So he can get my medical records using those. And applying for SSDI is basically mandatory in my long-term disability policy. So you can also choose whether or not to have your assumed income from SSDI withheld from long-term disability ahead of time. Again, I don't know why anyone would do this. I did not. So if I were to be awarded SSDI, I would then have to pay back long-term disability, as well as the lawyer would take his chunk. I don't even know how I would make out because it's in one hand out the other, basically. So SSDI had sent me something that I needed to sign and send back, which I did months ago. The website is still saying they never got it. I've let the lawyer know. I don't know what's going on. Long-term disability calls every now and then, and they're like, hey, we need a screenshot of where you're currently at with your SSDI claim. And this last time I was like, here's the release form. Talk to my lawyer. I don't know what's going on. Maybe he has more information. So they won't be contacting me anymore. They will just go straight to him and ask him for where things are. He's under the impression they're just really backed up. But I know other people who have applied around or even after me who have gotten decisions already. So I don't really know what's going on. I know there were problems at the post office, so I don't know if something got lost. I don't know. So I don't really have a lot of information about the actual process and paperwork involved with SSDI because I didn't do it. I had a lawyer do it. But I do know we had 2 1-hour phone calls each. And I had also typed out stuff for him. So like all my doctor's names, the type of doctor, all my hospitalizations, the dates, the hospital, the address, and all that stuff. So I do know it is a lot of work. They wanted work history and whatnot. But yes, looking at my notes, I want to make sure I touched on everything. I think I did. But that is going to be it. Really long video, I know. I'm sorry. But I see this talked about a lot on the forums, on different areas where I go, and I just want to make a video about it because there's not a lot of information out there that I've been able to find. Granted, I haven't looked too hard. But I just wanted to make a video, share my experience. That's what it's been like for me. I am in the process, as I said, of filling out these long-term disability forms right now. I'm still trying to catch the gnat, guys. But yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. And I will talk to you guys next time. Bye, guys.